Dave, I know you were having some problems with your microphone as well. Are you able to speak to us? Right, and how about Ken? Dana, I'm going to get going, but if you can check with Dave and Ken one more time, please. So thank you, everyone, again for joining us for today's April webinar. I'm going to close out the polls along the outside that you guys have all taken. It looks like the majority of you are joining us from the Midwest and the West today, with about that making up about 80% of the people joining us. Most of you are joining us as a one-person group, but if we do have a few groups of you that have 2 to 3 and even one that has more than 10 people. As always, for those of you joining us in a group, if you have not all individually registered, please make sure that you send us an email to info@ruralsafetycenter.org and provide us with names and email addresses for each person who is in the group. This will be important for when we send the survey after today's webinar, and that is what makes you eligible for certificates of completion and for CEUs. So again, if you have not all individually registered, please make sure you send us an email. It looks like we have a good representation of the different organizations today, with about 40% of you being local departments of transportation, which we're very happy to see today. And most of you are joining us on the computer only today. I will let you know that sometimes we do have sound issues with those of you joining us only by computer if you're on a Wi-Fi. So if for some reason the sound does start breaking up, if you wouldn't mind please joining us by the phone, you can find the phone number in the top left-hand corner. And again, that's only if you do have sound issues that occur throughout today's webinar. Okay, and just a few webinar logistics for everyone. Today's webinar will last about an hour and a half. Today's webinar is being recorded, and it will be available on our website within the next 3 to 5 days. For quality of this recording, we have everyone's phones muted except our presenters. But again, we do ask our presenters to please personally mute your own phones while you're not speaking. If you are listening to today's presentation via the phone, if you could please mute your computer, otherwise you will hear feedback in the background. Also, if you'd like to maximize your screen to see the PowerPoint as big as it can get, on the top right-hand corner you will see 4 arrows that point outward. If you click on that button, it will make the PowerPoint itself full screen for you. We are going to have 3 sections today of presentations, and at the end of each of these sections there will be time for question and answer. At any time during today's presentation, you can feel free to put any questions you might have in the chat pod, which you'll find over on the left-hand side. Once we do stop for the question and answer sections, I will read those out to the presenters and allow them time to go ahead and answer them. But this might make it so that if you have a question, you don't have to remember it at the end when the question and answer section occurs. You can put it in there at any given time. There is also a handout pod at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. Again, this has several resources that the presenters will be talking about today, including the PDF version of today's PowerPoint in case you're interested in these. All of these resources will also be available on our website with the archived version of the presentation today if you do not have time to download them. Lastly, we will be having 2 follow-up surveys that will come at the end of today's webinar. One will come directly following that, and that survey is to give us some more information about how our presenters did and if you like the topic and how you found out about the webinar. That survey that you received today will also provide you with the information you need to receive a certificate of completion or continuing education units. Once you do fill out that survey, it takes us about 2 weeks to turn around the certificates of completion and the CEU form that you'll fill out. that form will be turned into a different department at Montana State University by you. But again, we will fill those out within, or send them out to you within 2 weeks. And then we do a follow-up survey in about 3 months. That follow-up survey is just to let us know if you utilized any of the information from today's webinar. So for instance, if you have passed along the information to a colleague, provided them with the link to the archived version of this webinar to review themselves, if you've followed up with any of the resources we provided, or even if you have decided to look into your own roads and change them from paved to unpaved as a result of today's webinar. We'd like to thank our co-host for today's webinar, which is the Center for Environmentally Sustainable Transportation in Cold Climates. This group is a consortium of 3 universities, the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Montana State University, and Washington State University. This consortium provides multidisciplinary programs engaged in innovative research, education, and technology transfer focused on transportation issues for environmental sustainability. And at the end of today's presentation, I will provide you with a link to their website in case you'd like to check out our co-host a little bit more. We have 2 presenters and an expert on the phone with us today in order to answer your questions. Our first one is Ken Skorseth from South Dakota LTAP and South Dakota State University. He was the program manager for the South Dakota LTAP and the lead author on many key low-volume roads documents, including Gravel Road Construction and Maintenance Guide, and he is now happily retired, but we're very happy to have him speak with us today. We also have Laura Fay, who is a research scientist at the Western Transportation Institute at Montana State University. She's the program manager of the Winter Maintenance and Effects Research Group and the associate director for the Center for Environmentally Sustainable Transportation in Cold Climates, University Transportation Center. And we're also very happy to have Dave Jones with us today. He will be answering any of the questions that you may have on today's presentation. He is the Associate Director of the University of California Pavement Research Center at UC Davis, and he also chairs the Transportation Research Board's Standing Committee on Low Volume Roads. The goal for today's webinar is that once you've completed this webinar, you'll have an overview of the National Cooperative Highway Research Program Synthesis 485, called Converting Paved Roads to Unpaved. The webinar will present the contents of the synthesis report, which summarizes the state of the practice of the road conversion process, tools that can be used to aid in the decision-making process of whether to convert from paved to unpaved, including available resources and design guides, and what has worked and what has not worked for those in the unpaving process, including public outreach and identified impacts. We have a few learning outcomes for you. So to achieve this goal, we hope you will learn to summarize the process of converting roads from paved to unpaved, to identify information sources to aid in the decision-making process of whether a road is a candidate for unpaving, to distinguish between practices that can improve the success of road conversions from paved to unpaved versus practices that may reduce the success, and lastly, to identify why roads are being converted from paved to unpaved. And to get us started, I'm happy to introduce Ken Skorseth. Ken, can you speak at this point? Just want to make sure your phone line is unmuted.
Jamie, Ken
are we able to hear you?
He is unmuted, and I just had a text with him, and he can hear us. Sure. Ken, are you there?
Yes, I am. Are you not hearing me?
Perfect. We can hear you now if you'd like to go ahead and start the presentation, Ken. Thank you.
Section here, you know about the project.
Unfortunately, it sounds like we can't hear Ken, so Laura, I'm going to have to ask you to perhaps go ahead and present.
That's fine. I can step in, and maybe if Ken can come back on the line, I can hand it back over to him, if that works for you.
That would be great. Dana, if you wouldn't mind calling Ken and seeing if we can get him fixed again, please.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry for the old switcheroo, folks. This is Laura. I was one of the authors on the report as well. So I'll just start with the introduction. As Dana and Jamie mentioned, this is a summary of the work we did for NCHRP Synthesis 485. And the report was titled Converting Paved Roads to Unpaved. And the objective of the project was to identify agencies that have converted roads from paved to unpaved, to identify any tool, metrics, or procedures that have been used in the decision-making process for when and how to convert a road, identify any impacts of road conversions, identify any public outreach efforts, as well as knowledge gaps and research needs in this area. So what do we mean when we're talking about a road conversion from paved to unpaved? Well, generally what we mean is we're talking about active conversion. So you are purposefully using equipment and personnel to recycle the old deteriorated pavement material into a pulverized base material that can be reused. New aggregate may be added to the surface as needed to create this new unpaved road surface. There is a secondary meaning of converting from paved to unpaved, and that's the use of passive conversion. We don't highly recommend this, but it is going on, and passive conversion is where you essentially let the road go to gravel naturally. You allow a paved road to naturally deteriorate and break down into an unpaved road surface, where sometimes aggregate or gravel may be added to the pavement surface. So why are roads typically converted? What we found was that roads are being converted because of the cost of maintaining the road. And this may be the cost of maintaining a nice paved asphalt surface, the cost of filling potholes, the cost of personnel. We also found that safety was indicated highly as an issue, as well as complaints from the public. And in this project, we allowed folks to select as many or indicate as many different parameters of why these conversions were done. And these were the top three that were indicated, as well as all three together were indicated by many. So these are the top three issues that are really driving this whole road conversion process. So what roads are being converted? Typically, what we found are roads with ADT, or average daily traffic, less than 100 vehicles per day. So these are very, very low volume roads. As I'm sure you've heard in the media recently, there are a few examples of more urban roads that have been converted, but those are the exception at this point in time. Most roads that are being converted are very low volume roads. Is that Ken on the line?
Yes, this is Ken. I'm now speaking just through a mobile device, but is that working?
That is. I will hand it over to you if you're comfortable taking it from here.
I can. Oddly,
Great.
this entire connection for me is dependent on a mobile phone, but I'll be glad to take it. Laura, I'm looking at the slide, the road conversion process with a pie chart. Is that where you stopped?
That is correct, Ken.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now I'm with you with a connection. My apology, everyone. A little trouble on both ends, but I'll quickly go on from here. I think Laura pointed out the bulk of these conversions are on very, very low volume roads, the bulk of them being under 100 vehicles per day. And then just a couple there, if you look at the upper left of the pie chart, very high, the top one being 500 to 1,000, but that was clearly an outlier. We just really don't see much of that. And I know, or we know, those would be very difficult to convert and then sustain as an unpaved road. So we'll primarily talk about it from that perspective of the, I'm going to say 150 vehicles or less, which seems to be quite successful in many cases. How was it done? Continuing here with the conversion process. Again, if you look at the pie chart on the right, you will see that the bulk of it was done by beginning, or in other words, the existing pavement being recycled in place. That makes sense to us. Pretty good success reported in the survey with that. Moved down here, converted with a reclaimer, or sometimes just a ripper on a motor grader. And then a third step that was often mentioned in our survey was additional gravel added, either to supplement existing material, or I think in some cases to add enough gravel that the bituminous portion of the reclaimed pavement doesn't go back to a tightly bound state so that they can't maintain it. And then other things were mentioned here, such as the use of chlorides for dust control, along with chemical stabilizers, or sometimes just kind of generically some type of dust suppression. Now, continuing with the conversion process, how it's done, and this is more of field illustration with a little breakdown by who. Typically, we found done by agency staff with their own equipment, and of course, if they're simply breaking the old pavement by ripping or scarifying with their graders, they could do it in-house. However, we sometimes found combinations of this, either a contractor providing the recycling equipment only, or on occasion, sometimes the contractor was doing it all. And then, of course, the material that is recycled is shaped, recompacted, and I think that process is fairly straightforward. You see that with some frequency on some of our local roads already. Previously, many times, recycling was done prior to new overlay construction. In this case, they're simply doing it and then going back to an unpaved surface, in many cases, for the foreseeable future. There is no plan to go back to pavement. And this is mostly just a photo slide. I think this makes it real. If you look at the upper two photos, you see a badly deteriorating road here and then here. This is in the Central Great Plains. I'll give you a little more background to this with another slide later. A lot of deterioration out here in the traveled way, but the shoulder just totally destroyed in both cases here. Why does that happen? I'll try to remember to point that out on a later slide. Then moving down, the reclaiming process here, virgin gravel has been added, even though you can't see the old pavement underneath. It's virgin gravel added on top of a failing pavement, and then they are reclaiming or recycling all of it. You move to the left. This is beginning to do the finishing on a reclamation project, going back to gravel. The newly converted road down here, bottom left, looks quite nice in 2 years after conversion. This is a project that South Dakota LTAP documented, so we have quite a bit of history on this one. It's still looking pretty good, and again, it's simply being maintained as an unpaved road. Continuing on to the next slide, this would be opposite of active conversion, which we've just shown you. This is passive conversion, where you see a failing pavement, and in the far distance you see another section of it. In between, gravel has been hauled and placed. It's simply no active reclamation or recycling being done, but the pavement deteriorates to the point where you just simply can't maintain, and you place some aggregate over the surface. This was not the most frequently reported process, and frankly, we have some concerns about it from a safety perspective, which is part of our emphasis today. But again, it is being done. Again, almost always the very, very low volume roads. Continuing on with this process, we tried hard with the survey to identify practices that aid in the road conversions. In other words, they're not saying this was always done, but this would help a lot. And number one, to know what's out there. what those existing layers are, thickness of pavement, thickness of base layer or layers, not always known. This sort of goes with the same thing. Either up here you would have it on a set of plans, or you could simply go out there and do some coring or boring, which frankly I would say is very important to do. On the survey it wasn't indicated that that was always done, but it's very helpful to know what's there. Going down to that third sub-bullet, quality of the materials on site, or what you're going to add. We feel this is extremely important. Again, the survey a little vague sometimes on exactly how that was being done. And then if you're going to use a stabilizer and dust abatement, you've got to choose a product that's appropriate or compatible with what you have out there. And continuing again with the conversion process, cost. Cost, obviously that's one of the first things that comes up. And I will be bluntly honest with you, we struggled with getting accurate information. And keep in mind, again, this was a synthesis project. We were simply tasked with trying to find out what is happening around the country regarding converting paved. We were not tasked with research to really go down deep into the data to try to figure out exactly why and how. In this case, when we got cost data, this range must shock some of you, but it's literally what we had when we were pulling data from the survey. Keep in mind, though, some of the passive conversion that we talked about occurred with virtually no certainly no recycling of what's there. In some cases, it simply seemed like they allowed the pavement to deteriorate to the point where they would simply start using a motor grader to do some maintenance, and then hence this extremely low cost of $1,000 per mile. That's essentially no active conversion at all, of course. It's simply failing, and you start to blade or do blade maintenance as an unpaved road, all the way up to the other extreme, high in this case at $100,000 either per mile or per segment, depending on how they're tracking their cost data. And again, a little hard to decipher if it was anything other than a mile. Now back here's some additional reasons. We know we had variation in cost data due to these as well. All agencies aren't tracking their costs in the same manner. We were not sure all costs, in total were being included. And then, of course, it varies depending on how the conversion was done. I've already hit on that. The equipment that they're either going to use or rent. Again, the material added. And then, especially if they have to do some type of stabilization and or dust abatement, obviously that adds to cost. It could be very cost-effective to do it, but again, not everyone was doing that either. And then sometimes drainage in the actual base of the road was addressed as well at the same time, and that would go up higher again into the perhaps the $100,000 category per mile if you were doing all of these things. And then continuing, some more factors to consider. Obviously, the road condition, and agencies can have a different approach to that. What is the level of deterioration of a paved surface before you're simply going to have to convert it back to unpaved, or can you, in some cases, repair or rehabilitate a paved surface, even reconstruct? In some cases where there's virtually no good surface aggregate available, maybe this is indeed the cheaper option to try to repair or to reconstruct. But in the vast number of surveys, that wasn't the case. Then, of course, conversion to gravel is what has to be considered, and that was what was done in a majority of these cases, the vast majority actually. Now, it's interesting today, safety being an emphasis, co-sponsor of the webinar today, It is very interesting, and Laura showed you early on that bar chart where safety was one of the key reasons they're doing it. And I think intuitively, many people are going to say, well, how can an unpaved road be safer than a paved road? Well, if you see the condition and read the descriptions that some of them gave, you begin to understand where this does make sense. When you have such extensive potholing, rutting, and then breakup of pavement, it becomes more unsafe as a driving surface than to simply convert back to gravel. And so, again, in summary, that's what they were telling us, and it's a summary of a tremendous amount of comments. One thing I must say, we did have great success in getting good feedback. It started out a little slowly, and then later we almost got more survey feedback than we could handle, but it was great to have that and to get a pretty broad picture of what was going on. Again, other things enter in, sometimes also impacting safety. Clearly, the number of residents along these roads. If a road is essentially just carrying through traffic with nothing but farm fields or forest or grazing land alongside of it, it's much easier to convert without having an outcry from the public. But if you have a number of residents that live along these roads, now you have social and economic impact as well. And you do have secondarily, of course, impact here, ride quality. Dust is always a factor, particularly when you're in the Central Great Plains, the Mountain West, and the High Plains. Dust is a huge issue because much of the region is either semi-arid or actually arid. Traffic volume. It's not only the overall traffic volume, but the vehicle distribution and, of course, the type, as we've got there just below the heading. Average daily traffic has to be considered. Clearly, that has to be a factor. And in some, it seemed like they didn't necessarily have a real good hard on traffic count. They were estimating it. And I guess we could say, well, how could you not get a traffic count? But very small agencies quite often may not even have a counter. Yeah, but along with that, the second or last point there, the presence of heavy and overweight. In agricultural regions, for example, that's a huge factor. And oddly, some of them said it's cheaper. And maybe not oddly, maybe it makes sense to be able to repair or rehabilitate a pavement with deep base to carry those loads and then an adequate pavement thickness to get the overall design to carry these loads is about impossible in some cases. So again, they simply convert back to gravel. Gravel roads are much more forgiving and easier to maintain according to respondents. And then just continuing this, you do have to know going in an accurate cost of these road treatment options. Land use sometimes is obvious, maybe sometimes not as much, but you do need to know it. Then what is your capability to maintain afterwards? There are environmental issues, mostly dust, but there could be others. Right below it here, dust and erosion control. We found this next one, availability of quality gravel for surfacing. In some cases, I'm not sure that was considered, but they find out very quickly afterwards. If they didn't address that, they're going to trade a badly, let's say a pavement that has a horrible ride, bad surface condition, for a gravel road that doesn't perform well, and corrugates or washboards, as is often said. Right now, I won't bring it up, but I would like you to reference one of the handouts that's available, which is the federal, or the FHWA, Federal Highway Gravel Surfacing Aggregate Spec, which I attached as a handout. It comes directly from Federal Highways Gravel Road Construction and Maintenance Guide. Then, of course, you always have the public impact. Sometimes network significance is important, even though traffic, overall traffic may be very low. Just a couple of illustrations. This was the most often mentioned impact. When you go back to unpaved, of course, dust. If you see here, it's actually green vegetation, except the coating of dust. And these two photos are actually matching. They're from the same road. This happened to be in an oil patch region. They had to go back to unpaved, no way to maintain a pavement, but then you have the immediate issues with dust. That can be a safety factor when it gets as bad as what you see here. It actually obstructs vision of oncoming vehicles or vehicles that you may overtake. And then in agricultural regions, heavy agriculture, as we would say here, clearly it impacts the road conversion process, although in many cases, local managers said it's actually easier to try to accommodate this kind of traffic. What we're showing here, this is actually in a cornfield in the central Great Plains, and I've been told this unit is legal because that state allows full-length doubles on virtually every federal and state two-lane. Consequently, a local agency cannot keep them off of their roads except by local ordinance, which doesn't work very well. To try to build pavements to accommodate these is out of reach for them economically. And again, some of you may find this difficult to believe, but they're saying it's easier to go back to a gravel surface, which is much more forgiving. Clearly, these rigs will be pretty hard on them during a harvest, but once that's over, they can go out and do blade maintenance and put the road back in shape. And this, right along with heavy agriculture, doesn't matter where this is. I actually know the background to this one. This is where you get the damage that about 15 slides back, we showed the total destruction of a shoulder. It's this very large ag equipment. When they meet someone, they have to pull out to the edge of the road, and sometimes the outside dual wheels are literally out in thin air, which means the inside dual crushes the shoulder. And I'm just adding a little bit to the text here, but to try to design a pavement to carry that, particularly a pavement edge and shoulder strength, is out of reach for a lot of local agencies. If they harm the gravel road, then it's just so much easier to go out and repair it and put it back in shape. And then right along with this, maintenance capability. Not all, but many agencies see or feel rather that they're capable of doing pretty good gravel road maintenance and rehabilitation, and not so capable of doing the heavy maintenance on their paved roads. So again, it's a reason that they convert. Back to material quality, and I can't emphasize this enough. Matter of fact, this caption down here perhaps should have been up part of the heading, is good surface gravel available for conversion. We've got two here that are just distinctly opposite here. A lot of stone, large top size, sand sizes in there, virtually no true fines to keep that surface bound. Over here, an extremely high quality surface gravel. And I happen to know the background of these slides. It may be hard for you to believe, but the road on the left carries roughly 4 times more traffic than this one, and yet this one, the one on the right, does not perform. You do need to take a hard look at this, we feel, before you would, and many managers did comment about that. They traded pavement maintenance problems for gravel maintenance problems. It didn't keep them from converting, but it is a factor. And again, this, I would point you again to that federal highway gravel road construction and maintenance guide and the suggested specifications in there. I also attached a gravel calculation chart and a gravel spread chart as 2 handouts. It seemed like sometimes there wasn't the, I don't know, the basic field savvy in calculating quantities and so forth. So that would help you if you're looking at this. I've concluded my portion. Thanks a lot. My apology rather to everyone for some connection issues. We had to work on the fly here. Thanks to Laura for covering for me on those early slides.
Thank you very much, Ken. We appreciate you speaking. We do have a few questions for you, but first we're going to move over to our first poll question for our audience. That question is, identify which process or processes may be used to convert a road from paved to unpaved. Is it A, active conversion, B, passive conversion, C, alternative conversion, D, A and B together, or E, none of the above? So we'll give you a few minutes to do that. While we are waiting for some people, Ken, I'll ask you our first question. It's, could safety benefits be as a result of reduced operating speeds?
Quick answer is yes. We don't have good data to support that, and in this project we didn't attempt to determine that, but I have worked with that on other projects. But yes, I think people almost intuitively will slow down somewhat when they see a little bit of loose aggregate on an unpaved surface. So yes, I think oddly it's a positive impact on safety.
And Dave or Laura, did you have anything else you'd like to also share about that question?
No, not at this time.
Nothing from me, no.
Okay, perfect. Ken, I am going to end this poll and broadcast the results for you so that you can go ahead and address those. Can you see the results on your screen, Ken?
Yes, addressing the poll. Am I seeing active conversion, passive, and so forth?
Yep, so it looks like about 89% of our participants said that it's both active and passive conversion, and about 11% said it's active only.
Okay, I do see that, and I'm willing to comment on that, but will be open with you. I'm just a little bit puzzled by it. Active conversion possibly at only 11% indicates projects that were done, whereas A and B, both active and passive, probably indicates smaller sections where they've simply done the passive, which we illustrated, simply haul a little gravel and place it over the failing portion of a road. I would like to comment about that. I get a little concerned about that where you have frequent transitions from paved to unpaved, if indeed that's the case. I think in that case, you have two problems you need to think about. Number one, it's very difficult for motor grader operators to do blade maintenance when you have transitions from paved to unpaved. Those transition areas are difficult to maintain. Second thing that I don't like, and I've seen this in experience on other projects, when you place gravel over an asphalt surface that you did not actively convert or recycle, you will have trouble holding the aggregate on that surface because even a failing asphalt pavement is going to have some areas that are still pretty sound and good, and you're going to have trouble on those sections. And that's the entirety of my comment on this poll.
Jamie, do you have audio?
This is Ken. I'm still here, but I do not hear Jamie either.
All right, I think.
Can you hear me again now?
There we go. Yes, Jamie, thank you.
Okay. So I'm not sure where we left off, but the next question for you is, could you recommend a report or agency or resource with information on gravel road maintenance costs?
There is not a good resource on that at this time, and that goes right along with the problem that I know that Laura is going to comment on. Many people said there was just so little in the way of resources to guide them in this whole process. Quite frankly, our nation has concentrated for 100 years on improving the system, which always or almost invariably meant going from unpaved to paved. Now that we're facing the opposite, there's a great lack of resources, and I do not have a very good resource I can recommend on some type of not only upfront cost of gravel construction, but better yet, life cycle costing. I do know that North Dakota State University, through their Upper Great Plains Transportation Institute, is working on a software which they are already testing that will be a great help in that. At such time as that's available, we'll make an effort to get that out to the nation.
Hi, Jamie, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Dave.
Okay, I'd just like to add to what Ken said, and I agree with it. The problem is that there's no federal agency that essentially oversees gravel road management in the United States. So I think the big problem is that every county, every city collects their costs and uses their costs a little differently. And so I'd agree with Ken and say that there is no resource out there because there's no framework for actually how to put your costs together and standardize it. So as we saw in Ken's presentation, the costs of unpaving went from $1,000 to a mile to $100,000 a mile. A lot of that is how the various agencies would add their costs and what's included and what's not. Some include salaries for a particular project, some don't because salaries are paid automatically, etc. So a lot of issues around that. And then just to add to the work that Ken had mentioned about North Dakota, Wyoming have also done a lot of work in trying to set up a framework for collecting these costs, and you might want to look at Wyoming LTAP's website. They have some good data on their website.
Perfect. Thank you both. I do really appreciate you taking the time to answer those questions. We do have several more, but I am going to have Laura continue on just to make sure we don't run out of time, and we will go back to the other questions in the chat pod at the end of this next section. So, Laura.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, everyone. And I've got 3 shorter sections, so I'll buzz through these because I can see a lot of really good questions rolling in. So what we're going to talk about next is identifying information sources to aid in the decision-making process. And this is really what the questions have been all about. So as Ken and Dave mentioned, our study found a general lack of resources for practitioners to use if they're interested in either learning about a conversion or performing a road conversion. And this was echoed by the folks that responded to the survey. Often they didn't use any documented resources, whether it was for planning or actually performing the conversion. Instead, a lot of them indicated that they used a trial and error approach. And as Ken mentioned, for folks where working with unpaved roads is in their comfort zone, it often worked out well. But for folks that either didn't have good gravel or weren't as familiar with unpaved roads, it may not have worked out as well for them. For those who did convert roads from paved to unpaved, they rarely documented their procedures and their outcomes. And I think this is in part due to the whole cost issue. For large paving projects, I think folks are familiar with engineers going out to the site, taking photos, being very meticulous about what's brought out to the site, does it meet spec. But for these smaller budget projects or even projects that you're just kind of piecing together, I think a lot of this information is bypassed. So what we're asking folks to do is if you're interested in converting a road or you are actively converting a road, go out there and take some photos. Take them before, during, and after the process. Go out seasonally. Maybe go out in the spring if it's all mucky and take a photo, but then also go out after you reblade it. just so you have examples of what it looks like and what folks can expect in the future and how it's performing. Note any construction issues that you came across in the process. If you have it with you or if you can collect it, we encourage you to collect the crash data. And ideally, this would be before the conversion and after. But at this point, we'll take whatever we can get. If you do have crash data on roads that are or have been converted from paved to unpaved, and you're interested in getting that worked up, please let me know. I have some folks at the Iowa LTAP at the Safety Center that are happy to work that up for us. So contact me after the webinar. We also encourage you to note public concerns and public reactions throughout the process, and this may be even just making a note in your ledger about a phone call, saving emails, clipping out newspaper articles. It'll help you be prepared for conversations that may come up and what you can expect in the future. It's also important to note the comparative maintenance costs of the new surfacing. And so, as they mentioned previously, really accurately tracking the true cost, and ideally that would be in a uniform framework. So resources that address converting paved roads to unpaved. As Dave and Ken mentioned, there is no one document at this point in time that does this. If it existed, ideally, it would help folks in assessing the level of deterioration of the pavement. It would provide them options for rehabilitation or treatment of the road. It would potentially provide them an outline for doing a centerline road survey to determine the existing road structure and let them know what other materials, whether it's the recyclable materials or what new materials need to be brought in. And it might also address the use of soil stabilizers or dust suppressants. But because this doesn't exist, we didn't want to just leave the report at that. So what we ended up doing was creating a chapter of the report that is just resources for folks. So if you're interested in background information, generally on all things unpaved and potentially converting roads from paved to unpaved, you'll want to check out Chapter 4 of the synthesis. It's set up as an annotated bibliography, which means there's the title of the report, a short one-paragraph description of what's included in the report, and then the reference and a web link to access the report. And at the very end of the webinar, there will be a screenshot of what the report looks like with the web address. And you can download it for free, so you can easily access all of this information. So we categorized all the information sources essentially into 4 groups. General information that is out there on converting roads from paved to unpaved, general information on gravel road design, construction and maintenance, and then road condition and surface option assessment tools. And then the final section is useful websites. So moving into this, I'm not going to go through in detail all of these because I'd rather let folks ask questions, but I just want to let you know that these are the type of resources that we've provided. So resources on converting roads from paved to unpaved. There were not many technical reports out there, but this is what we found. There's a decision tree for unpaving, and it's great for providing background information. The next document, turning deteriorated paved roads back into gravel roads, is another great resource. The most robust case study on converting a paved road to unpaved is the 3rd bullet list, which is improvements to the Lynn Run Road. And this is a case study done by the Center for Dirt and Gravel Roads at Penn State. And we provide the link to their website. They're a great resource. So essentially, those are the only 3 documents that we really focus on in terms of information directly speaking to converting paved roads to unpaved. So what other information can we provide you? Well, recently, just before retirement, Ken Skorseth was able to update the Gravel Road Maintenance and Design Manual. It's a great resource. There's also the best practices for design and construction of low volume roads, as well as guidelines for geometric design of very low volume local roads. and then the Forest Service document, Low Volume Road Engineering Best Management Practices. And all these are great resources with great information. I know the Forest Service Design Guide has great pictures and schematics of different examples. Two more documents include the environmentally sensitive maintenance for dirt and gravel roads, and then two documents that were published for Australia and South Africa are the Unsealed Roads Manuals, Guidelines for Good Practice, Design, Construction, and Maintenance. So moving on to road condition and surface option assessment tools, we found quite a few road condition and surface assessment tools. They may not speak directly to the process of converting from paved to unpaved. They may speak to just gravel roads or just paved roads, but a lot of them are flexible and can be used for the conversion process. The first one, assessment of procedures for paved and gravel roads, is a great starting place. If you're looking for an actual tool where you can enter in data that you have and see how it will come out quantity-wise and cost-wise, the PACER tool, the Pavement Surface Evaluation and Rating tool, the manual it's a great tool. It's very user-friendly. It was designed for asphalt roads, but can easily be applied to gravel roads. The Gravel Road Management tool, developed by the local road research board out of Minnesota to pave or not pave out of Kansas. And then there's two documents that look at the economics of upgrading an aggregate road. So they look at the flip side of going from a gravel road to a paved road. And even though they're the opposite of what we're talking about, the information is all very useful and very pertinent. And then just the final group of tools are when to pave a gravel road, and that's that second document that looks at the flip side of unpaving. And Ken mentioned the online web-based tool put together by the North Dakota State University Upper Great Plains Institute. Here's a web link for that tool, and they're actually looking to make it more robust. And right now they have a great data set for North Dakota, but if your state has data and you want to help make this a more robust tool, you can contact me and I'll put you in contact with these folks, or contact them directly through the website and let them know that you're interested in either just using the tool or helping out. But it's a very user-friendly web-based tool, and there's the web link. The last two documents are the context-sensitive roadway surface selection guide, and then finally the development of guidelines for unsealed roads assessment by Dr. Jones, who's on the line. So moving forward, I promised you some useful websites. Many of these websites you can actually link to directly from the various reports I just mentioned. They're all great resources, and I encourage you to check them out. And I believe Jamie said that the webinar will be available on the web after, so don't worry about scrolling these down really quickly. Again, this list of websites is also available in the report that you can download for free. Okay. Jamie, I'm not sure if you want to do this question or just move forward.
Let's go ahead and do the poll break, and then we'll go there also so that everyone knows this, again, this PowerPoint that you're seeing today is available in the handout pod on the left-hand corner on the bottom. And again, it does include all of these resources. There's also a resource handout which has three other resources attached to it as well that will be links later on in the presentation. So our next poll question for everyone is, at this time there is no one document available to aid in determining if a conversion from a paved road to an unpaved is the appropriate option to consider. What information is available for use now? Is it gravel road design guides, road condition assessment tools, web-based information, or all of the above? And while we are waiting for that, Laura, why don't we go ahead and answer one more of these questions? The next one is, have you ever done the opposite by adding milled asphalt to existing gravel road? And this is a question coming from Stark County, Dickinson, North Dakota.
I'm going to let Ken take this if he's available and on the line.
Ken, are you able to still hear us?
Yes, excuse me. I had to get my phone unmuted. Yes, I have experience with that, not specific to this project, but with things I've worked with in the past. I will tell you, if you put milled asphalt on top of an existing gravel road, don't expect to have a pavement, because milled asphalt is almost invariably older, oxidized pavement. You place it on a hot summer day, for example, even in the northern part of the U.S., sometimes it goes down almost like a pavement, and agencies are happy. But I had two comments on that. It generally is going to give you a short service life. And the second comment, that needs to be placed with some thickness, and I would say my minimum recommendation would be 4 inches, 100 millimeters, if anyone's listening from outside the U.S., because it doesn't have the same structure strength in it that a pavement has. I have seen some greater success with it, however, if you add an adequate thickness on top of gravel and then put a chip seal on it. However, in the synthesis project that we're covering here, that was virtually never an option because of economics, and they were simply having to go back to gravel. And I'll confine my remarks to those at this point.
If I can just chip in as well, yeah, we've had some success in California, not placing it on the top, but you know, spreading it on the top and then blending it in with the reclaimer. If you're looking to substitute some new aggregate in there to get a little bit of height and to you know, to strengthen the material, because essentially if you've got more you know, sort of subgrade material as opposed to actual gravel on the road. We've had a lot of success with blending it in, but I would agree with Ken, don't just spread it out in the top, because it gets very difficult to rework with a grader, very difficult to maintain, very difficult to maintain the shape. You do tend to get vehicles plucking larger lumps out as well, and you'll often get a sort of situation of potholing in that roadway, which is very difficult to maintain with a grader. So I would, you know, recommend that you don't just spread it out on the top and expect it to work well, but certainly blend it in with your existing material in an appropriate proportion, and you can get a very, very good result out of that. Thank you.
Yes, and could I add to that? Dr. Jones is absolutely right. We've had some great success with blends of gravel and reclaimed asphalt. In that case, you'll get a little bit of the best of both worlds. You have quite a bit of bituminous material in it that will give it something of a binding characteristic, and you will have less dust. But at the same time, it will remain workable, so you can maintain it. David, is that what you said?
Yes, absolutely.
And while we have both of you speaking right now, I'm going to ask the next question because I believe you'll both be able to answer this one as well. Why is drainage not addressed during the conversion? It seems to me to be a fairly critical item, maybe second only to the availability of quality gravel.
You want to go, Ken, or you want me to go?
I think let's both address it. We work in different regions of the country and in the world. In the Central Great Plains, drainage isn't quite as critical because we generally have a pretty good height of grades and so forth to get the water away. However, it is critical. I would never argue that. And part of it, I believe, could have been a weakness in our survey. We didn't specifically ask about that. Should drainage be addressed? Oh, absolutely. But I know in regions of the country where you have constrained right-of-ways, not much of opportunity to construct or maintain a ditch, it's huge. So I would defer to Dr. Jones on that one.
Yeah, I would say it's of equal importance to the gravel. In all my years of experience where people are having problems with gravel roads or paved roads for that matter, invariably it's often a drainage issue. So yeah, not addressed in the survey. That was an oversight on the group as we did that section. I guess a lot of us just kind of take it for granted, but we shouldn't have. But yeah, drainage must be addressed. And you know, a lot of the problems with those paved roads actually starting to fall apart. Certainly, some of it is because they weren't, you know, maintained or resealed at a regular interval. But a lot of the problems are actually caused by bad drainage. You know, and if you're not sorting out the drainage, but you're coming back and patching the road, then that's not helping at all, because the water will win and destroy the road. So yes, if you are converting, and even if you have limited resources, certainly you must invest some of those resources in getting the drainage sorted out before you revert, or else you're just going to have more problems that are going to be very expensive to maintain. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Laura, at this time I've gone ahead and displayed the results for the poll if you'd like to address those and then continue on with the next section.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. Well, everyone did a really good job. I give you a A+ for your paying attention. Yeah, as it states, there is no one great document, but all of the above are available in the report and on the web. So you can always find them there. And like Jamie mentioned, we've got a lot of handouts, and the webinar will be available, and all of the documents are also listed in the report that will be available.
Just to clarify too, it was noted that there may be some troubles downloading that very first, or the second one, I guess the NCHRP one, because it is so large. This is the document that we've provided the link for as well, and the link is also available in that resource handout document. So that may be one that rather than downloading right out of this webinar, you may have to go to the actual web link for NCHRP to download it, but we've provided that link in several places as well.
Thanks, Jamie. Going back to the drainage comment, the Forest Service Design Guide does a great job of addressing drainage with road construction and maintenance. So that's a great resource as a starting place if you do have some drainage issues and you need to learn about it. So I'll just let Jamie load the next section and then we'll move forward. Or do I control that? Oh, there we go. Okay. All right, so this next section is distinguishing between practices that can improve the success of road conversions from paved to unpaved versus practices that may actually hinder or reduce your success. So identified impacts of the road conversion process. Cost, as has been mentioned many times, is a huge issue, and Ken alluded to this, but it's very important that you consider the initial cost of whether it's repaving or fixing a paved road versus the initial cost of converting to an unpaved road, and then also look out at the long-term costs and compare these apples to apples. A lot of folks just use the money they have on hand, they convert the road to an unpaved road, and they don't fold in those long-term annual grading, adding more gravel and dust control costs to the actual cost. And for some folks, especially if good quality gravel is not available, they find that it may be a cheaper or affordable option to actually repave the road. As I mentioned, annual maintenance needs to be done on these unpaved roads, and it needs to be done in a good quality manner. You need to have the equipment on hand or be able to rent it. And hopefully you also have staff that can maintain these unpaved roads or that can be trained to maintain them. Public outreach ended up being identified as a big issue with unpaving roads. Folks from the survey and interviews said that they've used public meetings to discuss the unpaving process. They've had meetings with stakeholders and residents of the roads or roads that are being considered for conversion. They've sent out letters to affected homeowners, and whether they did it on purpose or not, they've used the local media, that's TV, radio, newspaper, and through press releases to get this information out there. An example of a letter that was used in Vermont that was sent out to local residents is in the appendix of the synthesis report, just so you can see an example of how one agency communicated with the local folks on what they were planning on doing and how they handled it. So successful outreach measures include providing the public with information. And I think for a lot of folks, you think, oh, it's just a small road conversion project. It may not be a big deal. But for some folks, it's a huge deal. And they want to know why you're doing it. And providing the simple information of why is their road being considered for a conversion? Is it safety? Is it cost? Is it unaffordable maintenance? Is it just general deterioration? Is it calls from the public? Letting them know. Be transparent about your funding situation. Let them know how many roads you have to maintain, the state of them, and your available funding to do that. Other information on current and future road conditions. In the process of doing research for this project, one of the design tools had this really neat Google Earth overlay within GIS where you could rate the road condition as green being good, yellow being drivable but needing work, and red being needing immediate work. And even just having a screenshot of something like that to show folks, hey, this is the condition of the roads in our network. These are all the different projects we have going on, and here's our available funding. And with this information, a lot of folks understand the tight situation and why these roads are being considered for a conversion from paved to unpaved. Unfortunately, much of the documented public reaction to road conversions has been fairly negative, and if you just do a search on the web, you can find that pretty easily. But we've also found that if maintained properly, these converted roads are generally accepted by the public because of the improved driving surface and the increased safety. And this kind of flip in feeling about the roads does not happen overnight. It's usually a year or two down the road. And folks just see that the unpaved road is maintained at a higher level of service and to a better quality than the deteriorating paved road. So what are some barriers to implementation? Well, there are, as we talked about, a lack of available management tools, a lack of guidance documents, a limited dissemination of information. So this is the folks that are doing these conversions. A lot of them just aren't even talking about it. And it may be because of the negative perception of unpaving, or maybe they just don't feel like they need to talk about it. But we also found that there's a lack of communication between the local agencies, the state agencies, and the federal agencies. And this has prevented folks from learning the process from their neighbor, from the next county over, what have you. And we encourage folks, if you have done a road conversion, don't be afraid to talk about it. Because the folks in the county over may also be thinking about doing a road conversion, but have no idea where to start. And especially if you have local gravel sources and similar soil and road construction types, could be invaluable information. Other barriers to implementation that were identified were public and political perception. Converting the roads from paved to unpaved may be perceived as decreasing the quality of the road or reducing the level of service. And this was an opinion that was expressed, not an opinion, expressed by many. The public may feel that they're losing ground, that they deserve better than rock, that there's decreased safety, there may be a reduction in their property value, an increase in vehicle wear and tear, and an increase in road deaths. And some of these may be actual real things that they can measure, like an increase in road deaths, an increase in vehicle wear and tear. But at this point in time, we don't have the data to say unpaving roads decreases the safety of the road, or for that matter, increases the safety of the road. We need to collect the data, and we need to be able to tell people yes or no if that's true or not. And the same applies for the reduced property values. Someone needs to look at the data and actually be able to say yes or no. So by addressing these dust issues, involving public in the process, and creating a well-constructed and maintained unpaved roads, residents who lived on or used these converted roads have come to appreciate the safety and the improved driving surface. And this is in part because the agencies have been able to maintain these unpaved roads at a higher level of service than they were able to maintain the deteriorating paved roads. So with that, we'll let Jamie take it from here.
Perfect. Thank you very much. At this point, we are going to move over to the next poll break, and we do have quite a few questions, so I'll read one of those off in 1 second. The next poll break is, should public involvement and input be considered in the decision-making process of whether to convert a road from paved to unpaved, yes or no? We'll give you a few minutes to do that, and in the meantime, for the three of our speakers, the next question is, many of our roads were built with 24K trucks, and now we have 85K trucks. What kind of base is necessary to accommodate this?
David, do you want to go first? You've studied design a lot more, and I've studied maintenance a lot more. Over.
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure if the question refers to a paved road or to an unpaved road, but seeing this is converting from paved to unpaved, I'm going to assume that it's unpaved. You know, it's very difficult to get a consistent structural design on an unpaved road. And so really what we're looking at is thickness as opposed to just you know, trying to come up with some sort of a structural design for your material aggregate choices. So that said, you know, you're going to have a thicker road or a thicker base layer in order to prevent the vehicles damaging the subgrade or getting rutting in the subgrade and obviously getting stuck when it gets wet. There is quite a lot of guidance on thickness and thickness, you know, how much thickness you need for various types of axles. And I would refer you to Ken's Federal Highways manual, Unpaved Roads manual, that has some very good information, very useful information, simple. You don't need you know, a PhD in math to work it out, but to go with that. But generally, you're going to have to increase the thickness. You're going to have to watch your material quality. Make sure you are again meeting those unpaved road specifications that are also in Ken's manual, and go from there. Thank you.
And
our next, go ahead, Ken.
I was only going to say, I don't have much to add. I also know generically that's so hard to answer depending on subgrade conditions and environment. In the northern part of the U.S., for example, with extreme frost freeze-thaw cycles, you know, it's going to be different than it would be certainly from the desert southwest. So yes, you do have to look at a lot of things to do a good job with that, and that's all I have.
Perfect, thank you. Let's do one more question, and then we'll move on to the next section. So this next question is, how friendly are these roads, particularly when they are worn to motorcycles?
I saw that question. It's an interesting one, particularly when I'm sitting here in a state that has the largest motorcycle rally in the nation and a lot of unpaved roads. Again, there's not hard data to back any of this up, but I do know that it is somewhat more difficult to control a motorcycle on an unpaved road than on a paved. However, keep in mind that would be with the assumption that both were in pretty good condition. Keep in mind, though, how bad some of these pavements are or were prior to conversion, and in that case, you could actually see a somewhat improved safety situation for motorcycles. Over.
Yeah, I'd agree with Ken on that. You know, a good gravel road is better than a bad unpaved road for motorcycles. I have personal experience with that, and especially if you're on a road bike as opposed to an off-road bike, then that's going to make a difference. And certainly, you know, I've had a lot of experience with building good gravel roads, and you know, I've got photographs of kids skateboarding on them, and certainly for motorcycles, you can get a good quality surface that is suitable for motorcycle riders. Thank you.
Thank you both. We do also have one comment in the chat pod. I think this was said before, but just a reminder, the FHWA manual on gravel road construction and maintenance guide was revised, and it was a joint effort with South Dakota LTAP, so that is available now. Laura, I have gone ahead and closed the poll and broadcast the results if you'd like to address those.
Thanks, Jamie. So while the question, should public involvement and input be considered in the decision-making process, is kind of an opinion question, we recommend that you do involve the public, and you know, 97% of you guys agreed. We just encourage you to not avoid them. I think a lot of the negative press has come from folks that were afraid or didn't know that they should consider communicating with the public. And the public likes transparency, and they like to see the reasoning behind things. So we just encourage you to communicate with them. So I'll leave it at that. And if Ken and Dave want to say anything else on that, I'll let them.
Nothing to add.
No, I agree with you completely. Nothing here.
Okay, so moving on, identifying why roads are being converted from paved to unpaved. Well, that's really what we've been talking about this whole time. So really, we're just talking about the conclusions of this report. So I'm just going to quickly summarize the conclusions, and then we'll take some more questions if we have time. So again, road conversions are most commonly occurring on roads with average daily traffic less than 100. I think Ken threw out 150. Conversions have been shown to successfully work. There are few examples of conversions in more urban environments, but again, the focus of this report is on low volume roads. The most common process for converting these roads that we found is reclaiming and recycling the deteriorating pavement, supplementing existing materials as needed, compacting that material, and then applying and incorporating the surface treatment. Conversions are occurring because of a lack of funds to support routine maintenance and repaving, safety issues, and complaints from the public. This is a photo from Ken, and I think it perfectly highlights a safety issue, and I'm sure that these folks got complaints from the public. Unfortunately, there's a lack of information available on this topic, and we feel that this is one area where this field really needs to grow. Cost data for conversions is highly variable and often not well documented, and for those who are collecting the information, they're not necessarily collecting it in a uniform manner. Based on what we found from this report is that public outreach and stakeholder involvement generally led to more favorable public reaction following the road conversion. And really what we're trying to show is that a road conversion is just another tool to be considered in the pavement management toolbox. It's not going to be the right choice for everyone or for every road, but it may be the correct or most appropriate choice for some situations. And then the final step in this synthesis process is to identify research needs or gaps in the research. And for this project, that was not a problem. There are so many gaps in information sources. Really what we're trying to do now is to get together funds to develop a design guide for road conversions. Dave Jones has kind of started this on his own independently, but really what we're looking for is help from whether it's state DOTs, local road agencies, or even federal support to help move this design guide forward. But that's not the only area for improvement. Again, improved documentation of road conversions, improved documentation of safety and crash rates on these low volume roads. There are a few tools being developed right now, like the one at the Upper Great Plains Institute and in Wyoming, looking at cost-benefit analysis tools for this process. And then specifically developing a framework for road conversions in areas that are impacted by heavyweight vehicles. So this would be ag-rich areas or extraction areas. And then the final piece of the puzzle is helping these local road agencies by identifying funding sources. So this is a wide range of information needs and gaps in the research that hopefully we can look at moving forward. But with that, I will leave you with a screenshot of the report and the web link to access the report directly. You can download it. It's a free PDF, and everything that we presented today and more is available in the synthesis report online. And I think I'll leave it there, Jamie.
Thank you very much, Laura. I appreciate it. We are going to go to the chat pod and try and answer a few more of these questions before our time is up. So the next question that we have, and Ken or Dave, I'm not sure which of you would like to take this, but the next question is, have speed limits been lowered on unpaved roads?
Okay, this is Ken, but I would like Dr. Jones to comment as well. Here's my experience. This is more hands-on than from the survey, but in about 50% of the situations I've worked with, yes. It was never significant, generally about a 10-mile-per-hour speed reduction, and the bulk of that would be from the Central Great Plains. Pretty straight roads overall, section line grids, and then the other half, there was no change in speed limit. Over.
Yeah, I'll add to that. My experience is that there's not a big difference. A lot of gravel roads are essentially rural, and most of the people that drive on them are the people that live in the region and use those roads all the time, so they know the roads quite well. We've found that when in doing conversions from paved to unpaved, that the speed limit will often increase a little bit, simply because the road surface is better and people aren't dodging the potholes and the holes and the edge breaks, etc. But in general, you know, I think in rural areas the speed limit is what the speed limit is, and that's self-enforced. You know, there's no enforcement out there. Because the traffic volumes are so low, so very rarely will you get any kind of formal enforcement out there where somebody's going to go and sit and try and catch somebody speeding. So it's generally self-regulated, and I don't think that is going to change in the future. You can post signs, you can post warnings around sharp corners, etc., to try and improve the safety situation. There are a lot of things you can do. But generally, it's very difficult to control speed and enforce speed on a rural road in general, but an unpaved road in particular. Thank you.
Thank you. We did also have a question about grading, and there is an answer in here as well. So what solutions would you suggest for washboarding was the question. One of the answers that came through the chat pod was that grading is commonly used to correct washboarding. The use of wrap or recycled asphalt pavement as dust control could help too. And Minnesota did a study on wrap as dust control. But Ken or Dave, do you have any additional comments on that question?
I do. This is Ken. I'll bet Dr. Jones has the same, but grading or controlling gradation of aggregate, yes, it's critical. Surface aggregate is different than base or sub-base aggregate. However, I feel strongly you need to add control of liquid limit and plastic limit to try to get a minimum plasticity index in the fine material within a gravel mix. And again, there's recommendations in that Federal Highway Administration Gravel Road Construction and Maintenance Guide, and I would just ask you to refer to that. Over.
Yep, amen to that. You got to remember that a lot of people use Department of Transport specification base material for their unpaved road wearing course, and that generally doesn't work. Base material in a paved road has a paved surface on top of it that keeps it all nice and confined. In an unpaved road, you don't have that, so you have to have some other supplementary binding agent to keep the material together. So washboarding is purely a symptom of the fact that you do not have sufficient binding material in your aggregate. So good quality gradation. Again, I refer you, like Ken said, refer to the Federal Highways Gravel Road Maintenance. Stick to those gradations. Get some plastic material in there. Even if you have to pull it from your side drains, you have to get some dirt from a farmer who's trying to get rid of it. Get some fine, a little bit, and we're not talking a lot, just get a little bit of fine material with a little bit of clay in there to meet those recommendations that are in the FHWA guide, and provided you shape your road well, washboarding won't happen. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the other comments that we have, rather than a question, is just an interesting special case of note for our audience, and that was that Alaska politics required much of the North Slope Hall Road to be paved before permafrost problems were cured. So much of the pavement had to be removed to allow continuation of frequent grading. So that's just another FYI. A question for the two of you again is, have there ever been any cases of low ADT roads being converted within subdivisions where everyone has paved driveways?
Yes, I've seen that on a number of occasions. And that does bring about some challenges. The public road is unpaved, driveways are paved. There's a perception, of course, negative, that we'd like that public road paved as well, but it gets down to economics again, and all the reasons that we've talked about. What does become challenging if you convert those, if you have a lot of driveways, and especially if they are paved, ever after, or as long as it remains unpaved, the motor grader operators have to match the driveways in their blade maintenance. That can be challenging. 1 or 2 on a mile in very rural areas, no problem. But if you've got a lot of those, you do need to think about that when you convert, because you're going to have to deal with that. Over.
Yeah, nothing more to add except that that would be something you would have to take pretty seriously when you had your public participation in your decision. That would probably come up as a critical issue that you would need to discuss. But again, it boils down to economics. If the money's not there, then the money's not there, and you're going to have to work out something with that community. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have one question that was answered in the chat pod, so I'll read out both the question and answer, and then we'll take one final question before we wrap up, because we are getting close to time. So this question was, can gravel roads be effectively snowplowed without destroying the gravel surface in northern climates? And the answer that Ken provided in the chat pod was that snowplowing can be done in a good, tightly bound gravel surface, much like pavement. However, on a poor gravel surface with significant loose aggregate, truck plows do not work well. You need to use graders with a good mold board control. So I'm going to ask the next question as well, but if you do want to go back, Ken or Dave, and address that one as well with this next question. So the next question is, do traffic control devices such as signs change when going to an unpaved road?
Please go first, David. I don't have a lot of experience with that.
No, generally not. There's not a lot of guidance on that. And again, signs can be expensive, and a lot of local agencies can't necessarily afford to go out and put a whole lot of extra. For me, I would say, do what you can, whatever you can afford, do it. Especially with signs, because if people are warned about potential hazards, curves, etc., then it's a good information to have, some chevron boards, that sort of thing. But it shouldn't necessarily require anything additional to what is paved out there. Also, keep in mind that if you have a very dusty unpaved road, a lot of those signs get covered in dust, especially the low ones, chevron boards, those sorts of things. Can get covered in dust and maybe not be as effective as you want them to be. But personally, nothing comes to mind about additional signage that you would necessarily need to put out there. Thank you.
And having had just a moment to reflect while David was talking, I think about these many projects I've been on. There is very, very seldom a sign placed at those transitions. The MUTCD, though, Federal Signing Guide, does have a sign for it, black on yellow. I think the old one was Pavement Ends, legend. The new one is a symbol sign. But again, I concur with Dr. Jones. I very seldom see that, and would have to admit I haven't seen, crashes as a result of that either. Over.
And it looks like we do have a comment in the chat pod about this as well, saying that your advisory speed and curve signing may need to be reevaluated, as the actual speed may be at a different rate than what was able to be traveled previously. So that's another thing that may need to be checked for the signage. So I do want to point out that now on the screen you should be able to see a few additional resources. This is, again, the link to the NCHRP report that you can download. The next link is for Dr. Jones' website at UC Davis, and there are some pavement resources there. And then the third link that we have is for the center that is co-hosting today's webinar that I mentioned earlier. And so if you'd like to check out that center, again, it was the Center for Environmentally Sustainable Transportation in Cold Climates. So in today's webinar, you have learned to summarize the process of converting roads from paved to unpaved, to identify information sources to aid in the decision-making process of whether a road is a candidate for unpaving, to distinguish between practices that can improve the success of road conversions from paved to unpaved versus practices that may reduce the success, and also to identify why roads are being converted from paved to unpaved. I do want to take a moment to thank all three of our speakers again. Today was a fantastic webinar, and we had lots of discussion, which is always great, especially when it's coming in through the chat pod. So thank you, everyone who has asked questions, and we hope that we were able to get most of those answered for you. Again, this webinar is being recorded and will be available within the next few days on our website, along with all of the handouts that have been provided. So if you didn't have time to download those or the resources today, they will be up on ruralsafetycenter.org within a few days. We do have a few upcoming webinars that we'd like to let you know about. Our May webinar is incorporating safety data into the planning process at the rural level. This will be done by Cambridge Systematics. In June, we will be having the Institute for Transportation Engineers come and talk about their brand new Vision Zero virtual toolbox, which is being deployed this month. And then in July, we will be having someone from Iowa come and talk to us about how to address roadway safety issues for ATVs and other off-road vehicles. You can find all of our archived webinars on our website, as well as 2 training videos that we have, one that is an introduction to road safety audits on tribal lands, and one on the introduction to road safety culture. And if you do have any further questions that weren't able to be answered during today's webinar, here is the contact information with which you can contact one of our speakers, or you can contact the Safety Center and we can get that information for you. So again, I do appreciate Laura, Dave, and Ken, your time today. Thank you very much for presenting.
You're welcome.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Thanks, everyone.
Everybody have a great afternoon.